Okay. Well, welcome to Knitting Around LA. I'm Julie.
And I'm Judy. And today's guest is Tricia Royal. And she is a quilter extraordinaire. And I can't wait. I'm going to say we can't wait to hear all about her, and she's brimming with lots of cool stuff to share with us. So Tricia, welcome to the show.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for having me, Julie and Judy.
Thank you for joining us. It's our pleasure.
Absolutely. So do you want to tell us, we were chatting pre-show a little bit about, your background, but we really didn't get into anything about your fiber story. So maybe you want to jump in and tell our viewers a little bit about your hop, skip, and a jump around the United States, and where in that journey might you have come into contact with fiber?
Sure. So my story is a little bit complicated in that I've kind of lived everywhere, but I mostly grew up in Florida, in Central Florida, outside of Orlando, in a Seminole County, which is like some of the cities that are like Altamont or Longwood, but grew up there. My family still kind of lives around there. And when I was about 10 or 11, my grandmother, this tiny little 4'11" Sicilian woman, who has since passed on, her name is Josephine. And one summer she was visiting us. She used to live up in upstate New York near Watertown.
Oh, speaking of winter.
Yeah, exactly. Lake effect snow. So Josephine was there, and she'd come down to visit us in Florida. And I was always a crafty kid, really into clothes, and just loved playing around with the sewing machine that was at her house. My mom wasn't much of a sewer, but there was one there, and and so I convinced my grandmother Josephine to teach me how to sew. And so I guess I'm not very good with math, but I think that's something. I'm 45, so maybe 35, 36 years of sewing. Sewed all throughout high school. Also in South Florida, was very into like the book scene and, into vintage clothing. So I would alter clothing. I would make my own outfits. And then, so college, I ended up eventually going back to college. Kind of started and then left for a little while and worked. And I came back to school and I studied art history and history at a university called University of North Florida, which is in Jacksonville, Florida. And they didn't have anything to do with textiles, unfortunately, at that school. So I wasn't able to go that direction then. But when I wasn't when I wasn't at school, I was sewing, still making my own clothes, still buying secondhand stuff. And let's see, graduated from there and then went to Parsons, the new school for design, which is in New York City.
Great school.
Yep. So let's see, graduated from my first degree 2003. This was about 2005 that I went to Parsons and got a degree in fashion studies, 2-year degree. And then just became a nomad with my husband for the next 15 or so years. Lived in San Francisco, lived in Chicago, currently live in Los Angeles. But I've been making fibers like that whole time. I've been sewing, making clothing. I knit and crochet, how to weave in Chicago. You can kind of, I don't know if I'm pointing with the right finger, other side, maybe.
Yeah.
I can't do it. There it is. No,
one of those directions.
This one, yeah, that is a rigid heddle loom that some quilts are sitting on top of. But yeah, so I kind of do everything. But I started quilting in, let's see, my daughter was born in, I think it was 2006. I made my first quilt right around there. So I moved from New York to San Francisco, and I saw this program on PBS called Craft in America. I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, great series.
Yeah, and it was one of the first 3 episodes had these fantastic ladies in Mississippi that were making these string quilts. And I was like, oh my God, I really, really want to make a quilt. And I already knew how to sew. So I was like, I'm halfway there. And made a quilt out of a lot of vintage garment fabrics. Actually, it was like eyelets and, vintage prints from the 70s. It was like pink and green. And it was just a kind of a crazy string quilt.
Cool.
And then I really got into it like after my daughter was born. So I would say really got started with like getting into quilting probably around like 2010, 2011.
Oh.
So, yeah.
So I've got a question. So, I mean, I've been following your work for quite some time.
Sure.
And I know, you've been very experimental with your quilt techniques, and we'll get into that, later on. But
Sure.
I just wanted to say that, that was really a bold step for you. I mean, right off the bat, you just jumped in using eyelet in a quilt. I mean, give me a break. Like that. That's like not a traditional quilt fabric. You don't sew a quilt with stuff that already has holes in it. It's like so your quilt journey really started a long time ago, and I'm seeing an adventurous eye in terms of what's considered fabric and suitable fabric. Because I mean, I've got some quilts behind me. I'm a very traditional quilt maker, and it except for things like crazy quilts, it never would have dawned on me to go, especially in a string quilt with eyelet. Oh my God! If I had a hat, I'd take it off to you.
Oh, well,
amazing.
I think that comes from, I've always been a bit of an iconoclast. And if there's a box that I can like punch my way out of, or break the rule, like knowing the rules, like how can you break them? And so, because I already knew how to sew, why not? Like, why not use eyelet, or why not use baby corduroy? Like if you can make them all work together in a quilt and know technically what to do. Like in the case of that quilt, the string blocks had they were foundation piece. So there was a piece of fabric behind them. So like, why not use eyelet, right?
Yeah.
So
and quilting started out with women using fabrics that were left over from other things. So especially back in the mid 1800s, they didn't go to the quilt fabric store,
right?
Like we would. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they did. Yeah, they used kind of what they had. And in my case, it just, it seemed to like, those fabrics just seem to want to live together. I don't know.
Yeah.
So from there, I mean, I guess, do you want me to continue with the story?
Yes, please.
So,
I'm fascinated.
So 2010, 2011, we had just moved to Chicago. My daughter was in preschool, and I just started really, really getting into quilting. And, because she was otherwise occupied, especially she got through grade school. And I just really started diving in. And I already had this arts background, with the degrees in art history and fashion studies. And I've always been kind of like a cerebral person. And sometime around that time, I was like, I feel like an artist. I want to do something more with this quilting thing. And just trying to kind of changing my mind about like who I was and what I wanted to do and like what was I doing, and was the actual like practice of making quilts for me, was at like an artist's practice. And I was taking classes at this art center in Chicago called Lill Street, which is spelled Lill Street. If anybody wants to look it up, but it's a great art center with it has a textiles department, it has ceramics, which is what it started with. It has painting and drawing and photography and just all kinds of, craft and art. And I was taking classes there, and I was just like, really want to do something more with this. And the facilities there, especially in the textiles department, had they have like a room that you can do painting and dyeing and screen printing, and they teach classes. I mean, it's just this whole like immersive world.
Yeah.
And they have a program called the Little Streets Artist in Residence program, and it's like a year-long program where you can, apply as an artist to use their facilities, and you can teach. And I was like, I think I'm going to go for it, and so I did. That was 2016, 2017 that I was accepted, and then got the year-long residency, and it totally changed everything I did, because before I was doing a lot more quilts, which I can show you. I have some slides, but I was doing a lot more quilts with like vintage fabric and recycled fabrics, which means a lot to me, even from way back. But then I started getting into all the printing and dyeing and the painting and really doing a lot of surface design, and that just set me off on the path where I am today. And then I did another residency, like not 2020, but 2019, at the end of 2019. I don't know if either of you have heard of it, but there's a quilt museum in San Jose, California.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, we've been there.
Yeah, isn't it great?
Yes.
Oh, it's lovely. Julie took me. Actually, when you were there, was the knit and crochet, was it Stitches West? Was it over at the convention center at the same time? Do you know?
I don't remember. I'm not sure. I
Because
know
I'm thinking Julie and I may have been over to the museum when you were in residence.
If it was at the end of 2019, like October to December, if it was in that.
Oh no, we were there in
February.
Yeah.
We were there in the beginning of February. Okay.
There was another one of my friends might have been there at the time. Her name is oh gosh, now I'm blanking out. I'll remember later. But one of my friends was the artist in residence at that time.
What was her work?
She's Japanese American, and she's an illustrator. She does textile work. I can look her up if we're further on in the conversation later. But yeah, I believe she was there at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, we visited. It was 2019. It was 2019 when we visited, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was right before the pandemic struck. Or no. It was
2020. No, I think
maybe it was.
I think we visited in. Did we go both years? Okay, so anyway, let's move on. I don't know. I don't remember anything. But so you were telling us about your residency at San Jose Quilt and Textile Museum.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that was at the end of 2019, from October to December, and it was fantastic. Like my work, they have a hallway for the artists in residence to display their work, and they have a maker space there, and it was like a public-facing residency where I was able to display quilts in an organization that is all about fiber art and celebrates fiber art, supports fiber art. I got to interface with the public and teach classes and all that kind of stuff.
Great.
Yeah, on the artist path, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, do we want to look at some of your images now?
Sure.
Do you want to have any more conversation, or shall we look at images now?
We can do that.
So, go ahead and share your screen, and then we can go through these.
Great.
See if we can... You're clicking, but
there we go.
Here we go.
There we go. Hopefully this will work properly.
Yeah, and then you control the slideshow. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So do you guys, I wasn't sure how you wanted to approach this, but I can basically just kind of tell you about what's in each slide. Is that
go ahead. Go ahead and narrate. And we'll interrupt with questions as we go along.
Yeah, that's what we do. We'll chat.
That's perfect. So jumping off of what I was just saying about taking the artist's path, these pictures, can you all see those?
Yeah.
So these are some prints, letterpress prints that I made in 2017 when I was a resident at Little Street. And when I was there, I had access to their print department. So I made these, and what this is really all about is saying that like quilting can be considered an art form. It should be considered an art form. Like it is a craft, and it is something that is, you know, an object that you utilize, but it could also be something that can hang on a wall and be considered, you know, just as much a work of art as anything else. So this was an
that art craft, functional object, tension is always present in the fiber arts.
100%. Yep. And so this is like me, you know, kind of making a really like a strong statement, a feminist statement, you know, saying like, especially because it's primarily, although not exclusively a woman's art. And so, you know, quilts are art, you know. So I made these, and I actually sell these still. I still have some. But I wanted to start out with that just as a way to kind of like frame, you know, how I look at quilt making and art making. And I think you guys mentioned that you wanted to see some of my studio.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
So this is actually the room behind, you know, same room that I'm sitting in right now.
Is there a way in your slides to make the slide larger, or?
Oh, I don't think so, because I think I just sized, this is in Google Slides, and I think I just sized them to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just, all right.
No, I'm sorry.
Gotcha.
Oh, so you do some painting and printing on your fabrics?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I see silk screen up there.
Yes. So this actually was my previous, in my previous home, but basically it's the same here. I work out of my garage, you know, because it's California, fabulous weather.
You can do that.
Yeah.
I just open up the garage door, or, you know, prop the side door open and let the breeze blow through, let the light in, and I work out in my garage, and I silk screen on fabric, I paint on fabric, I do relief printing. And so in this picture, you can kind of see, you know, some of the fabric paint and screen printing materials and inks and things like that. And then on the right, that is where I'm sewing right now. Part of a sunroom with this crazy, like, is that a pentagonal window? I don't know that shape, but
yeah.
This kind of thing here, but it's really nice because there's just a lot of light out here. Not on a daily.
It looks like a great setup.
Yeah, it's lovely. A lot of space to work in, so that's nice. And I can
look fantastic.
Yeah, I can shut the doors. There's 2 doors out here, and you know, just kind of have a peaceful place to work. And I can always go back if there's any questions you have on any of these other slides. Sure. But so this is some kind of earlier work that I was doing, and I like to do a lot of quilts with like traditional motifs. Judy, you said you like, you know, traditional quilts. So like I'm using that as like my jumping off point. I like to do kind of simple patterns, but kind of play around with, you know, pattern and color.
Yeah, but your color work is fantastic.
Thank you.
It's all, you know,
I love your color palette.
I can see. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it, and you know, I see the rail quilt, and you know, it's almost like a log, the log cabin, and I'm thinking, I mean, those are like probably some of the most rooted traditional patterns in quilt making, but they take on a whole nother story because of your color combinations. And I can't quite see, I don't know if the fabric has texture. I'm sure your quilting adds texture, but oh my God, the color. Yeah. Fabulous.
Color's really important to me. I like really intense colors, really almost like hard to look at sometimes, but that's just kind of what I like. And I often tell people, I have this like line that I say that like working with color is like an antidepressant for me. It just really, you know, it keeps me engaged. It keeps me happy. It's like, it literally is therapy for me. So I use it a lot. And so that's the thread throughout my whole work.
I love it. I always tell people that for me, color is the most important of the elements of design.
Yeah, for me too. So yeah, I wanted to include these just to show that, you know, I do use other, you know, fabrics besides the ones I've been painting on and working on, and
yeah. Good. Yeah, I mean, we like to see earlier work and see your progression.
Thank you for that, because it's, you know, your work now is kind of avant-garde in use of the material. So I mean, this roots you back into you know, quilt tradition, and gives those of us who are still rooted there hope that we could go forward.
Oh yeah, just keep experimenting. That's how I got to the place where I am now. So,
oh my God, they're wonderful.
So these are a few more quilts that they're not too old. They're kind of again, you know, playing with traditional ideas.
Wow.
Strip quilt here on the left, and kind of a lattice structure going on there.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, and unfortunately I don't have a close-up of it in this slideshow, but so all of those colored pieces that you see are fabrics that were either hand dyed, over dyed, hand printed, like relief printed, screen printed. Some of them were natural dyes, some of them were synthetic dyes, and then where you can kind of see like little letters and words showing up, those were pieces of a bag that said Lil Street on it, which was given out to the kids, and they do camps at the art center there. And I just thought, you know, when you start to cut them up, you like abstract them a little bit, and I just thought that was kind of cool.
I love how this the lattice one, it looks three-dimensional. It's a you know, it has an illusion. I love that. Love that.
Yeah, I really love. I like when there's depth in quilts, you know, when things kind of drop forward and push back and have a little bit of, you know, optical illusions going on.
Great, beautiful. And then this one you screen printed over the fabric.
Yes. So the one on the right, those were vintage sheets. I don't know, like 70s era, I think. And so they must have been by the same manufacturer, but just in a different colorway. And I was trying to go for like kind of a woven motif. And then that's a brush stroke that I screen printed onto the block. So it's, you know, you have that like kind of
very cool.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And you know, I love that the ink that you used is that it has transparency. Right. So you're not, you know, you don't have an opaque screen. You know, the print has the transparency adds another layer with the color.
Yes.
So it's super cool. Super cool.
And I love that. Like I play around with that a lot in the Surfers design stuff that I'm doing. When there's like areas where colors start to create other colors by that overlap, I really enjoy that. So
beautiful.
So the next slides.
I guess we both really like this.
Yeah, these were very they both, or a variation of both of these, hung at the San Jose Museum, and I constantly get questions about these. But so these are done with, there's a type of fabric paint called Dynaflo, Dyenaflow, that's by Jacquard, and it's very, very watery, and it has a watery consistency. So when you paint, it's like watercolor.
Yeah.
And so I was just playing around with what would happen, especially with the one on the right, like starting with painting a circle in the middle, and then I would quickly paint another circle around it, and the colors would start to meld and flow together. And like, what happens? And then when you hang them like to dry on the drying rack, they can, you know, it sometimes kind of, you know, flows into each other. So that's what's happening on the right. And then on the left is actually the same shape, that circle, but cut into quarters. So then you have a drunkard's path type shape.
Yeah.
So that's what that is on the left. But then it's, serpentine sort of.
All right. What's the scale? What size is that block on the right?
Sure.
And then what does the quilt kind of come out at?
Okay, so both of these are like less than 50 inches, I would say. So like each block in the one on the right is probably somewhere around 10 to 12 inches at max.
Oh, okay.
So that's probably, like 36 or 40 inches across. And the one with the kind of drunkard's path serpentine type shape is probably something like a 30 by 40 quilt.
Oh, gotcha.
Great.
Yeah. So they're not very big. I'm not making, I tend not to generally make very, very large quilts.
Well, as a wall piece, that's a good size for a wall piece.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where my mind goes with my quilts. Like, even though I do put them on beds, it's more like about the art object for me.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask is, when you finish the one on the left, the drunkard's path piece, is that a quilt that would be used on a bed or no, so it's not washable per se.
Not right.
Per se, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, per se. I suppose if someone wanted to lay these over themselves or like a small child, they could, but that's where my mind goes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then I should mention, but like this question hasn't come up yet, but I'll mention it anyway. I tend to use either a long arm or a domestic machine to quilt my quilt. So the quilt on the left is with a long arm. So I was able to do like kind of a nice, like swooping sort of motif. And I like to keep my quilting pretty simple. So you'll probably notice that throughout too.
So in your studio now, you've got a long arm.
I do. Yeah. I don't have a picture, but it is to this direction in my room.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I tend to do very large quilts. I'm going to be working on one for my daughter that's going to be 100 by 108, 100 by 103. But I take them out to a gal who quilts them for me, because I just have I have a Bernina, an old Bernina, and you can't do it. No. All right. So long arm. Wow. Yeah. My hat's off to you again.
Yeah. So since we're talking technique, what kind of batting do you use on these? And I assume you put a hanging pocket on the back for a hanging rod. What's your batting, and how do you finish the edges? And
okay. Those are great questions. So I tend to, so with my long arm, I have a roll of batting on there, and it's just white, and is it Warm and White, I think is the brand. I forget who.
Warm and Natural.
Yeah. And I order bolts of it at a time, $300 bolts or whatever, but they have, king size with batting, and I use that. So just cotton batting. I suppose I could try other battings. I've heard that like wool batting is fantastic, but I have not tried it yet. I just kind of got on the track with that a long time ago, and I just like how nice and flat it is. Right. And then, what was the second question? Remind me.
How do you finish your edges?
Oh, yes. So I tend to do a facing on most of my quilts. So meaning I don't put they're bound, but the binding is sort of to the back, around that edge. I would say like 85% of the quilts I make are made that way, because I don't want the frame that a binding can sometimes.
Yeah.
I'd like it to, go all the way to an edge, kind of like a painting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you have a clean edge, and then do you hand stitch the edge of the facing on the back so that
exactly. Yeah. That's
exactly. And then is your backing fabric something plain? I mean, it's something that's not intended to be seen ever, right?
It almost always these days is just a solid color fabric that either coordinates or you know, if I wanted to contrast for some reason, but it's almost always just like Kona, usually some matching color on the back.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. That's a really good question.
Kona makes such a great fabric. You know, their cotton is lovely.
Yeah, nice. It has a nice, like, smooth hand.
And a good weight.
Yeah, and that's a good question because it gave me the chance to talk about like how I felt about bindings. And I mean, there are times when I think a binding looks really beautiful and like complementary, and I will utilize it. But generally, I like to face them. And then, so I thought I'd move on. I have about 15 slides, but
that's fine. I think sounds good.
Tell me when you want me to like speed up or slow down. But so this is just a little bit of a view into like some of this surface design that I've been doing. A lot of the quilts that I've been doing most recently involve these types of splatter painted fabric. And so how I make this is like, usually I buy commercial fabric. Sometimes I dye it myself, but usually it's commercial, and I use watered down fabric paint or Dynaflo, which is that watery paint that I mentioned, or I use spray bottles that are filled with paint or droppers, and I drop it and flick it and just, you know, go to town until I get like a really interesting texture on my fabrics. So that's what you're seeing here on the left. And then on the right is some blocks in progress. I forget what this type of block is, but just something really simple using those splatter painted fabrics.
And these were started out as solid color fabrics, and you're over painting them. You're doing design on top of them.
That's absolutely right. Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very
cool. On the piece on the right where you've pieced them, it's like a rail print.
Yes.
So the centerpiece is the hand augmented. Are the colors to the right and left of that centerpiece, are they the fabric that's not been manipulated?
That's correct. It's just solid colors of fabric.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Yeah,
I love your color palette. I love your color palette.
Yeah, and I think of fabric like paint. You know, maybe, you know, if you both are you both knitters, or you like do
knitters and other things?
Okay. Well, I feel like almost like my fabric, or when I'm knitting too, because I like to do multicolored knitted objects as well, which I don't have in this slideshow. But I think of it like paint. You know, you're constantly mixing and matching and putting colors next to one another and like seeing how they react. And I just, so it's a real delight to work with color. And then here's more in the same series. Again, really simple.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. 9 patch in a log cabin. And again, mixing the solid fabrics with the.
Oh my God. I just want to dive into them. They're so fantastic. The colors, Tricia, the colors are just exquisite. They glow. Really, really glow.
So what I'm saying about being an antidepressant for me.
Yeah.
Let me see what I have next.
Oh my God.
I just made this slideshow a few hours ago, so I forget even what I had in here. But so I guess moving on from some of the things that are, you know, with the fabrics that I like to make. So that's like one part of my practice.
Right.
And I mean, they sort of mix, everything sort of is like one big, you know, soup of my weird brain. But so then I've also been working in the past couple of years with like raw edge applique and like how, you know, ways that I could play around with that, and using, you know, solid fabrics like commercial fabrics that I find, or this was painted with Dynaflo on the right, and kind of doing raw edge, you know, applique where it's kind of sewn around the perimeter of each little shape. But these are like a quilt as you go technique. So that's like Have either of you ever done a quilt as you go quilt before? No?
Not really.
So it's like each block is quilted and then you find a way to join them together. And there are many ways of joining them together. Some people use sashing and they, sew it together that way. I end up just zigzagging mine together because it's more of an art quilt.
Right.
So that's where when I was playing around here. I actually just taught a class to the Portland Modern Quilt Guild in Portland, Oregon, about how to do some of these techniques. And so I had those like readily available to show.
Great.
But these are more of the same little blocks, like quilt as you go. And then this is last week. I sewed them all together with a zigzag, and I have yet to put the binding on, but that's a completed quilt.
Beautiful. And I've been seeing these on social media in the last few days. Right. You know what this reminds me of, though? It reminds me of mid-century fabrics from the 1950s, mid-century prints in a way, because they had a lot of these shapes and stuff going on.
Absolutely. Prints. All that like fascination with like geometry and like simple motifs and like, manipulating them. Absolutely. And then that's an era of, I love looking at vintage books, vintage magazines. And when I say vintage, I mean 50s, 70s, 80s,
Yeah. Well, the 1950s was 70 years ago already.
Right? It's wild.
Yes, I know very well that 1959 was 62 years ago now.
Wow.
Yes, it's unbelievable.
Well, I mean, I still think it's like the 1990s in my head sometimes. Yeah. So, I keep forgetting that it's now 2021.
I know. You find yourself saying, well, yeah, this thing happened just a few years ago. And when you think about it, it's like, no, that was in 1980, and that was 40 years ago. Now, it was in 1990. It was 30 years ago, or even the early 2000s was 20 years ago already.
Right. Yeah, time flies.
Yes.
Does it?
So I thought I would put that in there just to show that, like, I'm not all painted fabric.
Yeah.
And then
oh my God.
More color. So I'm like a magpie, or I just want to do it all and try it all, and like I can't stop moving. I can't stop trying something new. And I'll get on these little tangents. And I don't know if that means I have some sort of like mental problem, but
no, you're perfect. It does not mean you have a mental problem, because that means that none of the rest of us have mental problems.
Well, what it means is I'm a little bit crafty ADD, because I have like 10, 15, 20 things going at once. So
yeah, well, I fully understand. I have, over the years, I have this little internal struggle where I say to myself, if I would just focus on one technique, one body of work, maybe I would be as successful as, this person or that, or the people that really focus. They have like these attributes that I feel I'm missing. But it's like, if I was able to do that, I would have done it 30 years ago. So I'm just, but I have gotten to where it's like, no, I'm not going to go do a class in needle felting a garden gnome. I've learned to discipline myself and not go do, adopting new techniques.
Yeah, it's hard. So in this case, so what these are these little quilts, and they're probably like less than 12 inches, gigantic here. I like to take a lot of close-up photos of things when I'm working, but
yeah.
So, and these are all a bunch of those small quilts laid out on a floor. And so maybe you all have seen, like, online, there's been like a huge trend in the last several years for like boro and kanta quilted like fabrics and quilts and things like that. So I was like, oh, that's really cool. I love the idea of kind of making collages on little collages almost, but with fabric. And so that's kind of what's going on here. And then the stitching is like that big stitch.
The running stitch.
Exactly. Yeah. Or sometimes I got bored and I did chain stitch or, stitch or whatever, just trying new things. And
they're great.
Yeah. So that's what's going on with those. And I taught classes on that at the museum up in San Jose. So that was really fun. And it's more that raw edge. And this was going back 2019. So I'm still playing around with that. Like what can I do without having to like turn under the edges, and kind of like when they start to fray and get a little weird, with little threads that start to pop off.
And it gets a little more free form, instead of there, and there's a place for everything, but when you're not turning under all the edges, that it's just a different quality. This is like free, and there's a wabi-sabi and like that. It's rather than refined, and fussy sounds like a put down, but refined and I don't know, but there's like a freedom to this.
Yeah, and it's yes, Judy.
I was going to ask on the piece on the right, that single unit that we're looking at. Do you pin them down? Do you use a like a Pellon a fuse on it? What keeps them in place before or as you're doing the hand sewing?
Great question. So what I do is I use a glue stick.
Wow.
It's a super secret that I'm giving everybody right now.
Oh my God. You went right for the, like, I'm doing this simple, I'm just
quick and easy. Talk about unfussy. Quick and easy, unfussy. Not little, I'm gonna iron the what's the stuff called where you put it? It's
a fusible webbing.
Whatever.
Oh my gosh.
Which I mean, I know how to do all of that. Like I clearly know how to like turn a corner, I know how to sew. So it's knowing, like going back to an earlier statement, it's like knowing when to break the rules. Like, the rules, you can break them. So like, there are
I love you. This is so fantastic. It's like you're a woman after my own heart. It's like I want to use a glue stick too. It's like direct. It's like boom, and you're done.
It's acid-free glue stick. Make sure you have an acid-free glue stick so it doesn't get weird with your fabric. If you're going to wash the item later, the glue is going to wash out. And you can also use the Elmer's glue as long as you use it very, very lightly. You could use that. They're like, I don't have it in front of me, but they're like these things that you can buy that are like a tip that you can put on your Elmer's glue that makes like a really tiny like bead of glue. Those are both like great ways of temporarily basting your fabric.
Cool. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Genius.
And I didn't make it up. I don't want to like take credit for that. I think I read about it or heard about it somewhere and I was like, oh, that's brilliant. I'm just going to do that.
It is brilliant. It is brilliant. Yeah.
And then it's, they're quilted only, like I quilt through the top layer and the batting. And then I just make it like pillowcase style and put a backing on and turn it inside out. They're very small.
The back is real smooth.
Exactly.
On this one. It's not quilted through all 3 layers.
Exactly. Because then that way I have knots and like weird stuff on the back.
Oh yeah.
So let me see what the next one is here. Changing direction slightly again. So like a huge part, especially when the weather's nice, not like today when it's rainy and cold. I go out to the garage, I paint there. And so this is just a quick selection of fabric that I'm going to be using in like future quilts or, just weird fiber ideas.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Now, those paints there. That's not the Dynaflo again here.
No. Some of it is the one on the right. There's a few that are that way, but the ones on the left are just a paintbrush with screen printing ink.
Oh.
So just and you trying to use contrasting colors. So for instance, in the one on the left, in the top left of that, you see like a blue and a fuchsia pink or a neon pink.
Yeah. Yeah.
The original color of the fabric is blue, and I'm just using pink paint on it. So it's a little bit hard to tell what's what there, but that's what's happening is that the ground fabric is one color and the painted on fabric is another color, or paint on the fabric is another color.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Another thing that I love to use is complementary colors, you know, because of what they'll do
Exactly
in a piece. Yeah.
They you know, going along with color theory, which I won't get too far into because I'm not an expert, but you know, they definitely make a very interesting, very electric pairings, and so I like to kind of play with that.
Absolutely.
And then so yarn. I know you both are into yarn, knitting around LA. But, so like this is a picture I actually posted to Instagram, the one on the right, yesterday.
Yeah.
And some friends of mine were talking about the sculptural quality of quilts, especially not as they're necessarily on the wall, but as they're kind of, you could display them in other ways, or you could show them or photograph them to other people in other ways that are other than flat. And so this is the same quilt, same quilt that's on the left, but I threw it on the ground here in this room, and it kind of takes on like a different, you know, it's almost like an animal or something.
Yeah.
But this was made with, these are all really super cheap, mostly acrylic yarn and whatever yarn that was donated to the museum in San Jose. And so people come to the museum and they have a maker space there, which you may have seen when you were there. And they, you know, people are getting rid of their old yarn, they're getting rid of their old fabric, they're getting rid of old books. And that's like my special sauce. I love that kind of stuff. And so when I was there as a resident, I was looking through all the bags of discards and I was like, what can I do with this? Yeah. And so I started making these pom-poms. And so it's sort of like a collaboration between me and the people who would visit the museum, or at least that's how I was envisioning it. And it's like, it's cheap yarn, but it's just so happy. So
yeah.
Yep. We just share that. And
then, yeah, that's what we have experienced with yarn bombing is the, you know, using the acrylic yarns and those colors, and it makes people happy.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes people happy.
And it's durable, you know, in the case of yarn bombing.
You want the durable, and you don't want to spend a lot of money on it.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And in this case, these yarns were free to me, so that was kind of, you know, fun. I love finding things cheap and free. Who doesn't?
Yep.
So. Of course. And then so recently on Instagram, somebody asked me like, how do you like organize all of your scraps? You know, because I'm doing all just the last few slides are just some what I'm doing at this exact moment. But I do something called confetti fabric, and I've been doing a project, 100-day project. The last I guess it's been 25 days today, out of 100. So I'm quarter of the way through. And this is kind of one of the ways I organize my yarn scraps. These are strips of fabric in the top there, and then I subcut those into like smaller pieces. So they're like maybe less than an inch, most of those little pieces. And then I turn it into confetti fabric, or what I'm calling confetti fabric, because I don't know if it really has a name.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of these on. I didn't realize you were doing a 100-day project.
Yes,
seeing a lot of these. Oh, so. I mean, they're fantastic.
Thank you.
They're fantastic.
So what this is all about is I don't like throwing anything away. And, you know, sometimes when you're quilting or you're knitting and then you end up with, you know, maybe it has a lot of colors in it or something, and you end up with this like pile of yarn or fabric, and you're like, what am I going to do with this? Like, I don't want to throw it away. It's beautiful. It's beautiful just sitting there on the table. And so I just started saving it. And then I saw this, and again, this is not, I don't own this particular technique because people have done this before, but you use like a stabilizer.
Oh yeah.
On the bottom, on the top, or you can have a piece of fabric and then you put down pieces and then you put the stabilizer over top of that. And then I just stitch through it like hundreds of times.
And that's the water soluble, and then you rinse it away.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. going to ask, how do you get the stabilizer off if you stitch through it?
That's right. So
Yeah, water soluble.
That's right. Yeah. Solvy, the stabilizer company,
Right.
they make a sticky Solvy, which is kind of like really low tack masking tape, and you just put that over the top of your piece and stitch, and then put it in water and yeah.
And that's what you can do something with all these little pieces like that. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's great.
And so I've been playing around with that. These two are part of that project. So these previous ones were ones I started back in 2019, 2020. And then this project, I started it at the beginning, or I guess mid-February, because it's been about 25 days. So these were two from this past month, and these are just kind of some wild and crazy ones. And I really like, I haven't really talked about what inspires me, but I do like graffiti and like bright colors and sort of urban spaces. And so, not that I intend to, but I think that like inspiration is kind of coming out here. And I think that might be the last one. Yeah.
Oh,
my last ones.
Great.
They're wonderful. They're so wonderful. Oh my God. Yeah.
Do you want me to stop sharing my screen?
Yeah, we can stop sharing your screen.
Okay, I'm back.
Right. All right.
That was an incredible walk through the journey of your techniques and your quilts, and they're just amazing. Yeah, you are the best. I want to ask, are you talk about teaching? Are you teaching any place locally? Do you teach online here? Do you belong to any quilt guilds, or we entice you to belong to the Nerdy Knitters of the San Fernando Valley?
So good questions. I just, like, I think I mentioned it earlier, I taught a class online on Zoom for the Portland Modern Quilt Guild. It was in mid-February, I think the 13th, but that was my first time teaching online. But because I moved to LA about 6 months before the pandemic started, I have no idea what's going on here in LA. So I would love for you all to share with me what the local scene is like. I want to know.
All right. Because we have a really nice, Julie introduced me to the Quilt Guild that she had belongs to, that I've since joined. And they're really, it's a lovely group. Oh, not Quilt Guild, yarn knitting. Sorry.
Yeah, I was confused.
You're looking at me like, what Quilt Guild?
I think there is a quilt guild around here. Quilting is one of the things that I don't do, so I don't know as much about the guilds and stuff.
But the Nerdy Knitters of the San Fernando Valley.
Oh.
And they've been, since pandemic, we meet online, and they've got a really fantastic setup. They're a great group, and they do both knitting and crochet. So we certainly say welcome and check that group out.
Oh, I will.
And I know a bunch of organizations, but I'll tell you offline.
Okay.
I'll email it to you or something.
Yeah, because the bad timing of the universe and everything else, like, having to be inside and away from other people is nice because you're productive, but then you don't get to have that social aspect of being in or being involved with local community, which I want to do. I hope that the end of this year, me and as we get through the year, that we can all get there. So
that's right. Meeting in person again.
Exactly.
We can. Yeah.
Well, I've been one of the fortunate ones that have been able to get vaccinated because of age. So I know, and I know for you ladies that will happen too. And as Julie and I have spoken before, the sooner the better. The sooner the better.
Totally agree.
Yeah. Because it's just, we need the ability to meet again. That connection the human physical connection is awesome. Sitting and having a cup of coffee, sharing work, discussing ideas. You know, that's a fabulous. Yes, internet is wonderful, and thank God that we've had this, so that we have had the ability to make and maintain some form of connection. But it's you know, it's only a substitute.
Exactly.
You know, we're you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, the great thing is that we can have artist talks and we can reach an audience that's not in our local area. But being able to get together where we can physically touch our work and share our fibers, you know, in person, will definitely be great when we can get back to that.
Agreed.
Yeah. There's sort of an energy synergy when you get people together, you know, and an exchange of ideas, and there's an energy that is created that you're not quite able to replicate online. It's a different experience. But Julie's absolutely right, though. I mean, you know, you're being able to be in your studio with you right now today is phenomenal. I mean, you know, we wouldn't have had that experience last year pre-COVID. You know, if we might have connected with you, but we'd be meeting at a coffee shop, and you know, or you wouldn't say, "Oh, come over to the studio." But then that experience of your space is limited to just she and I in your space.
Right.
So, you know, there is some upside, but
yeah,
well, you know, yeah, I mean, I think that it would be great to take Knitting Around LA on studio visits once we're able to, you know, and do this actually in the person's studio. And, you know, something to look forward to. I have put your website and your Instagram handle at the bottom here for everybody. And yeah, everybody should follow you on Instagram and check out your website, you know, and make that connection, that internet connection.
Awesome.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and we really want to say thank you, Tricia. You've been so warm, so gracious, you know, meeting us today and inviting us into your studio and sharing your creative process with us is so welcoming. And you're just really such a delight. You're really a delight.
Thank you both for hosting this today, for this fantastic conversation. For chatting about the weather earlier on.
Definitely our pleasure. Well, and I hope that, you know, we're definitely going to look forward to keeping in touch and getting together in person once we can, since, you know, you're very close to us in our local area. Yes. Thank God, you know.
We're local.
Yeah. And so for us, for our viewers, we are going to be back again next week with another fabulous guest. It's going to be London Kay. And then the week after that, we're going to be visiting with Slip Stitch Studios. So everybody, please come back, like, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell. And I guess we'll see you next time. Tricia, thank you so much. It was so great meeting you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Me too.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.